the Evangelist Mark copied the Homeric epics according to what a book written by an American receiving rave reviews, even from its skeptical commentator, states. The Homeric Epics and the Gospel of Mark by Dennis R. MacDonald. And we should note that we asked ourselves, why were the Gospels written in Greek and not Hebrew or Aramaic? How did Rome become the center of the Christian religion? And why were the first Christian popes and the first saints all members of the Flavian imperial Roman family? Well, that's not so. The first saints actually and martyrs were in Israel. The first bishop of the Christian church was the cousin of our Lord Jesus Christ, James, and he was the first bishop of Jerusalem. It was later that St. Peter became the bishop of Rome. Now, there are some questions about the researcher Joseph Atwill, author of groundbreaking book Caesar's Messiah, a Roman conspiracy. Tried to shed light by presenting new ways of understanding the creation of Christianity. Now, according to the Evangelist Mark copying the Homeric epics into the Gospel of Mark, we see the photo with Mark as the symbol of the societies, Mark with a lion, but will not deal with the non-existence of certain saints, nor with the known contradictions between inspired texts, nor will you study the apocryphal books. The only helper in the effort is the book released a few months ago in America by Dennis R. MacDonald. The Evangelist Mark copied the Homeric epics into According to Mark and answers to various dark parts of the Gospel of Mark, and the first most important, which have occupied theologians for centuries. Let's read some very interesting examples of not plagiarism but literal copy-paste, and see some very strangely contradicting questions and answers. Why does Jesus sleep in the boat during the violent storm? Why did Jesus drown 2,000 pigs? Why does Mark invent the story with the execution of John the Baptist, in which women are also involved? Why does Jesus curse a fig tree for not having fruit out of season? Why are his disciples surprised when they see Jesus multiplying the loaves, since they have already seen him do it before? How does Mark know what Jesus said when he was alone in the Garden of Gethsemane? Why does Mark not mention Mary Magdalene or other two women who attended the crucifixion and go to his tomb in the morning of the resurrection, or even Joseph of Arimathea until after Jesus' death? Why is Joseph of Arimathea not mentioned again? How did he get the dead body so quickly from Pilate? Why do women go to anoint Jesus with myrrh after his burial? And why do they go at dawn and not the night before when the Sabbath was already over? All these and many more strange mysteries explained by Dennis R. MacDonald in his book, The Homeric Epics and the Gospel of Mark. Where are the answers to all these questions? They are found in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Homer is to be precise because Homer was not a person. MacDonald's shocking position is that the Gospel of Mark is a carefully considered, conscious construction of an anti-epic based almost exclusively on the epics of Homer. Plagiarist Mark simply modernizes Judaizes Ulysses, introducing a new hero, and other parameters of the writing of the Gospel. Naturally is the Old Testament, but from which Mark draws overwhelming less evidence. Excerpts: Jesus' disciples are fishermen in a dry Palestine because Ulysses and his companions are also sailors. And Jesus, carpenter. Ulysses, Homer's mentioned, is also a carpenter. And the similarities are endless. Peter resembles Eurylochus, not only because both speak for all the other fellow disciples, but because both were accused by their leaders of being possessed by evil demons, but also because both preferred, rather than suffer, to break their vows to the hero. Why did the chief priests need Judas to identify and to point out Jesus to them so that they could arrest him? They already knew Jesus. Jesus taught publicly in Palestine for 3 years, and on at least one occasion, speaking in the temple, he conversed with the high priests, accusing them of making the house of the cave of robbers. The answer is simple. The Traitorous Judas plays the part of Melanthius, son of Dolius, in Ulysses, the Odyssey. After his return to Ithaca, a few recognize Ulysses, who appears as a beggar. Melanthius is the one who betrays Ulysses and attempts to arm the suitors. Euryclea, the nurse of Telemachus, is one of the few people who recognizes Ulysses. Evryonomi, the servant in the palace, bathes Ulysses, smells him, and dresses him in clean clothes. In other words, not smells him, but applies myrrh on him so he smells fragrance. Mark plays with the names of two women who he recounts the incident where an unnamed woman breaks an expensive jar of myrrh and anoints Jesus, and while the disciples are indignant, Jesus tells them to leave her alone because wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, which she did, will be mentioned in memory of her, hence she will be glorified everywhere. MacDonald finds 11 similarities between the crucifixion of Jesus and the death of Hector, all in the same order, and 11 more similarities between Mark's account of Jesus' burial and Homer's account of Hector's burial, all in the same row. As for the resurrection, Homer's heroes are constantly coming and going to Hades. All that Mark adds is the resurrection. In the Odyssey, the companion of Ulysses falls asleep and falls from the roof to his death. His ghost tells us how unlucky he was. In the Acts of the Apostle, a young man also falls from the window, falling asleep, and is killed. The young man is more fortunate. Paul happens to pass by, resurrects him, and his name is Ephthios, meaning happy, joyous. All commentators on MacDonald agree on one point. His work closes once and for all on the questions of Christology. Some examples regarding the plagiarism of the Evangelist Mark from the Homeric epics would be interesting, but these are countless cases. So we find that Mark is not just some literate friend, companion, disciple of some illiterate fisherman from Judea. He knows the Homeric epics very well. Common Greek, which was the international language of his time, had huge differences from Homer's language. A simple look at the Gospels in Homer is enough. The study of Homer at that time presupposes a parallel study of dictionaries as well as commentaries on the Iliad and the Odyssey. Who were able to do this? But of course the Romans, and by no means illiterate fishermen. The revolution starts in your mind. Telemachus and Athena arrive by ship and disembark, just as Jesus and his disciples arrived by boat and disembark. They found a great multitude on shore, 4,500 men. Everyone sat in groups, 9 groups of about 500. They found a great multitude on the shore, 5,000 men. They all sat at banquets and greens by 100 or 50. Pisistratus told his guests to sit down. Joseph told his people to sit down. Everyone ate and was satisfied. Everyone ate and was satisfied. Odyssey K 1 out of 69, according to Gospel Mark 4:35-41. The crew of Ulysses went up to the island and sat down. Jesus got into the ship and sat down to teach. On a floating island, Ulysses was telling stories to Aeolus. On a ship sailing, Jesus told his stories to the crowd. After a month, he withdrew and sailed away. When it was late, Jesus withdrew and set sail. You can see the similarities here for some reason. Ulysses was asleep, Jesus fell asleep. Odyssey 467 out of 560, Mark 14, 1752. Ulysses learned that he must go to Hades. He cried, losing hope for life. Even so, he was left to his own devices. Jesus knew that he must die, and he was emaciated unto death. Even so, he was left to his own devices. Ulysses went to the sleeping crew and woke them up. Don't fall asleep now with sweet sleep, but let's go. Jesus went to his sleeping disciples and woke them up. You are still asleep and resting? Arrive, the time has come. Ulysses went to Hades and returned. Jesus died and came back from the dead. Mark 11, 1-14, Odyssey G and H. Ulysses, though a king, entered the city wearing foreign clothes behind, from a mule-drawn carriage carrying washed clothes. Jesus, although the Son of God, entered the city humble on a borrowed mule that was saddled with the clothes of the disciples. Ulysses stood and observed the fine buildings and trees, among which was a fig tree that bore fruit all year round. Jesus entered the temple and looked around, and the next day he cursed the fig tree for not bearing fruit, even though it was not the season for figs. Ulysses 100 out of 116, Mark 14, 13, 16. Ulysses sent 2 companions to seek hospitality. Jesus sent 2 disciples to look for lodging. They went and met a woman who was getting water to take to the city. They went and met a man carrying water to the city. They asked questions and were shown a high palace. They asked questions and were shown a great opening. One prepared his meal. The students prepared a dinner. Should we continue with the abductions that Mark makes in the Iliad as well? Iliad, Marcus. Hector then realized that they were going to kill him because his gods had abandoned him. Jesus knew he was going to die and complained that God had forsaken him. The soul of Hector went with a sob to Hades. Jesus let out a cry and breathed his last. The Trojans mourned as if their city had been destroyed from top to the bottom. Jesus' death heralded the fall of Jerusalem and the temple, the veil of which was torn from top to bottom. Mark 6, 45, 52. Zeus on Mount Olympus saw Priam traveling towards Achilles. Jesus saw his disciples rowing from the mountain. Hermes walked on water to Priam. Jesus walked on water to his disciples. Priam was terrified, expecting the worst. The students were terrified, expecting the worst. Take it otherwise now. Ulysses, though a king, entered the city wearing foreign clothes behind a mule-drawn carriage carrying washed clothes. Jesus, although the Son of God, entered the city humble on a borrowed mule and was saddled with the clothes of the disciples. Nafsika considered the coming of Ulysses to be the will of gods, and the Phaeacians considered him divine. The crowd shouted, "Blessed is the coming in the name of the Lord." He, Ulysses, entered the city at an advanced hour. Jesus entered the temple at an advanced hour. After these prophecies, Ulysses disguised as a beggar, and he sat alone. After these prophecies, Jesus sat down at the table in the home of the humble leper. Euryclea entered with a basin of water and washed his feet. Later he anointed him with oil. A woman came in with an expensive alabaster jar full of myrrh and poured it on Jesus' head. He dropped the brass vessel, spilling all the water. She broke the jar to pour out the myrrh onto Jesus. Only she recognized her king. Only she recognized that Jesus would die. Mark 6, 17, 29. And Ulysses, Agamemnon was slaughtered among platters and dishes. John was beheaded and his head was displayed on a plaque. The celebration was marred by murder, and again the celebration was marred by murder in the New Testament. The murder of Agamemnon foreshadows the dangers of Ulysses that Ulysses will face. The murder of John the Baptist foreshadows the dangers that Jesus will face. Telemachus and Pisistratus went to Sparta by land. Jesus and his disciple went to Galilee by land. Menelaus refused to send them away on a fast. Jesus refused to send them away fasting, the guests. They all sat down, men and women, and in the New Testament, they all sat down, obviously, men and women. They took bread, wine, and meat and distributed them. Jesus took bread and fish and distributed them. Everyone ate and was satisfied. Everyone ate and was satisfied. Zeus decided Hector must die. Pilate decided Jesus must die. Hector called Deiphobus for help, but he had disappeared. Jesus complained that God had forsaken him. His God had also disappeared. Odyssey I 101 from 565, and according to Mark Gospel 5, 120, good neighborly relations. Shepherd called his neighbors. The swineherds called out to their neighbors. The Cyclops arrived asking about Polyphemus' wild goats. The Gergesians went to see the pigs. And recommendations. Ulysses and his crew boarded the ships again. Jesus and his disciples boarded the ships again. Ulysses told the Cyclops to proclaim that it was he who had blinded him. Say that you were blinded by Ulysses, son of Laertes, who has his home in Ithaca. Jesus told the possessed man to proclaim that the Lord, so Jesus healed him. Ulysses and his crew set sail. Jesus and his disciples set sail. According to Gospel of Mark 5, 1-20, now in Ulysses and his crew, the convoy reached the land of the Cyclops. In the mountains they were grazing wild goats. Jesus and his disciples arrived by ships in the country of the Gergesene in the mountains. They also raised livestock. The reference is 2,000 pigs, swine. Now, when Ulysses and his crew disembarked, they encountered a wild cyclops living in a cave. When Jesus and his disciples arrived, they encountered a wild demoniac who lived in caves. He asked if Ulysses came to harm him, and the demoniac asked Jesus not to torture him. He asked Ulysses' name. He asked the name of the possessed. Ulysses replied, "No one." The possessed answered, "Legion." According to Mark Gospel 4, 35, 41, and Ulysses again, the crew of Ulysses went up to the island and sat down. Jesus got into the ship and sat down to teach. On a floating island, Ulysses was telling stories to Aeolus. On a ship sailing, Jesus told his stories to the crowd. After a month, Ulysses withdrew and sailed away. When it was late, Jesus withdrew and set sail. Ulysses was sleeping. Jesus fell asleep. The greedy crowd opened Aeolus' pouch and a storm broke out. Storm, outbursts, wind howl in the New Testament. The crew was uncomfortable. His students, his disciples, were unable to react. Ulysses woke up. Jesus woke up. Aeolus was the lord of the winds. Jesus was the master of the sea winds. This lake of Galilee can be emptied with a bucket, porphyry. Mark 14:17. In Ulysses, Kirke gave Ulysses and his crew a sumptuous dinner in which there was plenty of wine. Jesus and his disciples dined on the Passover drinking wine as well. After dinner, while the crew slept, Ulysses spent the night with Kirke asking her to leave but not expecting a trip to Hades. After dinner, while the disciples slept, Jesus spent the night praying, asking to avoid the cup. In Mark 5, 1-20, again in Ulysses and his crew arriving by ship at Aiaia, Jesus and his disciples went by ship to the country of Gergesenes. There are so many here, it's just unbelievable. Hector's corpse saved from desecration. Jesus' body was saved from desecration. After they bathed him, Hector, and anointed him with oil and wrapped him all over in the beautiful mantle, Joseph bought a sheet, brought Jesus down, and when the Sabbath passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought perfumes. The three women were at the head of the mourning, Andromache, Hecate, and Helen. Instead of Christians, they should have called you Hectorians. Acts 20, Ulysses. The crew left Troy and traveled back to Greece. Paul and the crew stopped at Troy after leaving Achaia. After the voyage, Ulysses and the crew had lunch. After the journey, Paul and the believers had lunch. The Rolling Stones, according to Mark Gospel 15:46. Immediately after they placed Therion megastone, after lifting it up, he rolled a stone and closed the entrance of the tomb. The stone was too big, according to Ulysses. For who could not remove from the high door with our hands the stone which he had placed there? And according to Mark Gospel 16:3, they were saying among themselves, who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb? In the end, neither Ulysses nor Jesus moved the stone. Ulysses needed the Cyclops, that's why he didn't kill him, but only blinded him, and Jesus had the angel move the stone. Question, why does Jesus wait for the angel to move and cannot move himself? He's supposed to have been resurrected now. Well, yes, of course. The angels are catering to God. So if God is powerful, can he create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it? That's not so. The angels have their work to do. Now, according to Mark Gospel 9:3, Jesus along with Peter, James, and John. In Ulysses, Athena touched him with a magic wand. First he put around his breasts and his youth a clean garment and a tunic. Jesus was transfigured. His clothes became sparkling white as snow. According to Mark Gospel 9:2, Telemachus and Ulysses became, because he was afraid, turning his eyes away, and after addressing words with wings, he said to him, "Some god you will be." To him, the long-suffering Ulysses replied, "I am not some god. Why do you liken me to be immortal? But I am your father." Ulysses asked him to keep his identity a secret. Telemachus did not speak. Now the Epiphany, a voice from heaven during the transfiguration of Christ. The voice from heaven announced that Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus asked his disciples not to tell anyone what they saw until he was resurrected, and the students did not say until he was resurrected. With the rationale of the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, Holy Spirit, Father and Son are the same. Well, in this case of Jesus, we can say that just as in the case of Ulysses, with Ulysses revealing himself to Telemachus as his father. So you can see there's a lot of similarities here between Homer's Odyssey and Ulysses and the Gospel of Mark. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.